Our show this week is going to be centered around fantasy football and the AFC North. The AFC North consists of my Cincinnati Bengals, the Cleveland Browns, which have been a laughing stock the last 12 months. We talk about them continuously on our show. Um, we have the Baltimore Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I said Pittsburgh Steelers last for a reason. With that, we're gonna we're gonna get on there and talk about some of the best fantasy players off of each team. Last week we did it position by position. We did some brainstorming. Maybe it might be a little bit better, a little bit more organized if we roll with a team by team concept. So we're going to get on to it, guys. What team do you guys want to start with?
Let's go ahead and jump in with the Browns.
All righty. So the Cleveland Browns, the Baker Mayfield saga, ultimately ended up headed out to Carolina Panthers. They signed Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson had his own issues. We'll say that. We've covered it in plenty of other episodes. Basically, we have no idea if Deshaun Watson's even going to play. But we're going to roll up and we're going to throw up the Browns depth chart here. The Cleveland Browns, starting quarterback Deshaun Watson. Is he going to start? Who knows? We don't think he will. But, they got Jacoby Brissette, a very capable quarterback, to say the least. Two of the best running backs you can possibly get in a fantasy league with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Probably one of the better receivers in Amari Cooper. And then we have Donovan Peoples-Jones as probably somebody that you might need to look out for. And then David Njoku. He'll probably be somebody starting tight end at some point in their fantasy league, whether they draft him or not. But let's just talk about the draft expectations fantasy-wise when it comes to drafting a Cleveland Browns player, and what's the outlook moving forward if you decide to take a Cleveland Browns player?
Yeah, I can start off. I'm not high on the Browns. I think there's only 3 players on their depth chart that really should be drafted. There's a couple more that have potential. I'm not touching a quarterback. I'm not drafting Watson. I'm not drafting Brissett if Watson's out. We're supposed to hear something. I think news broke today that the NFL's ruling is supposed to come out tomorrow on what his suspension will look like. But it really doesn't matter to me. If he gets 8 games, I'm not drafting him for half a season. I might pick him up, but I just don't think he's worth it. In the running back room, I really don't think he has much of an impact. I got Nick Chubb. I'm a little lower on Chubb than most. I have him like running back 17. I think he's a solid RB2. He hasn't eclipsed 300 touches in a couple years since Kareem Hunt got there, and I never think he will get back to that RB1 status while Hunt is in Cleveland. But moving right on to Kareem Hunt while we're talking about him, I think he can be a flex play for you. He's the guy I'm targeting in this backfield. I'm not drafting him over Chubb, but at the value you can get him for, I'd rather have Hunt. I think that he's a lock to be your running back 1 if Chubb goes down. He's that type of guy. There's a few of them, A.J. Dillon, Tony Pollard, Kareem Hunt, maybe Alexander Madison, and the list stops. Like, those are the backups that you want to draft, and those are the guys I'm looking for at that point later on, running back 29. So he's your RB3 flex play. You have him on the bench. I think he's the one on this team that I would be trying to get.
I would disagree with you. I think Chubb is an RB1. I think he proved it last year whenever Hunt went down, but that is, stick my foot in my mouth moment there because Kareem Hunt was down, and that's when Nick Chubb became an RB1. So the talent is definitely there, but I would agree with you. I think he's still an RB1. I look at him as, a early second-round pick in most of the leagues that I'm in, but we have differing opinions, and that's why I'll probably end up with Nick Chubb if he's not a keeper in our league. So
that's one thing. I'd look at fantasy a little different because Nick Chubb, we talked about him in our running back show a while back. Like, he's in the conversation for top 5 in the NFL. But in fantasy, the number one thing to me is opportunity. And that's not just, is he going to be your starter every week? I look at that, especially from a running back perspective. I look at two things: your carries and your targets. How many times is your team looking to get you the ball? And Chubb, this year he's projected to have 240 carries and 30 targets. Like that's not going to do it to me when you have guys, Jonathan Taylor, Naji Harris, Christian McCaffrey can push 400. They're getting the ball that much more. I just don't think Chubb has the ceiling that everybody else does, and that keeps him. He has to be perfect to be an RB1 with the usage he gets.
I agree, but it is what it is.
Yeah, taking a look. I mean, the running back situation in Cleveland is definitely interesting, right? Especially when you don't know who the quarterback is. I think if you have Deshaun Watson as your quarterback starting day one, which, again, we don't know what's going to happen with that. I think your running back for the Cleveland Browns becomes less valuable because he does like to throw the ball. He's a stat getter. And with a surefire number one receiver with Amari Cooper, he has somebody to actually throw it to. But if Deshaun Watson cannot play and it's Jacoby Brissette, they're going to rely heavy on that run game. I think picking up one or if not both of them and piggyback off each other there in the draft is probably the smartest bet. If you're going to draft one of the running backs, you might as well try to go after both of them because they're both really good players and they're both really going to be the workhorses of that offense. As you can see, like if you look at the wide receiver room, you have Amari Cooper, and then you have Donovan Peoples-Jones, who is an under the radar receiver on most people's draft boards, but he's a guy that I think is going to be a really good number two and probably have a coming of age type season that he's really going to open some eyes and he's going to find himself on some people's starting lineups every week. But the Browns they're weird, man. Sometimes you think they might show up and win 8-9 games. Sometimes they might show up and not really play good at all and end up winning 4. But with that being said, who knows? Another interesting draft pick would maybe be David Njoku. Like we said, if you have tight ends being drafted, you may not even draft a tight end to one of your last rounds if you don't get one of the top picks. So, I mean, the tight ends listed across the bottom here, we got Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, George Kittle, Darren Waller, TJ Hawkinson, Dalton Schultz, Dallas Goedert, Zach Ertz, and then finally Mike Gesicki from Miami, which we talked about last week. You're not going to have, outside of that top 3 or 4, very valuable tight ends in your lineup every week. Is Njoku even a draft pick in most leagues? Probably not. I would say probably not. If you've got somebody that, I don't know, if you got 12 teams in the league, yeah, he'd probably get drafted. But he's not going to be taken before any of those guys, and I can guarantee that. If he does in your league, you probably got a good chance of beating whoever took him. So, with that being said, any last parting words on the Browns? Like we said, I don't think the Browns they're not going to be terrible, and then it all depends on the quarterback situation, honestly. But it'll be interesting to see what they do at quarterback.
Well, I think this question is Brissett better than Baker Mayfield? Can the Browns win more games with Jacoby Brissett than Baker Mayfield?
I don't think he's worse. That's where I'm at. I mean, Baker wasn't winning you games, and I don't think Brissett's going to go out there and win you games. Can they be? What were they? 9-7 last year, I think.
Something like that.
9-8, somewhere in that range.
500 somewhere.
Yeah, Jacoby Brissett can have the Browns at 9-8. Wouldn't shock me a bit. I don't think he's going to take them 12-5. I don't think they're going to win that division with him. With Watson, it's a completely different conversation. But, I mean, in my opinion, hopefully we don't see Watson this season. I mean, I think that's what needs to happen. But just talking about that quarterback carousel there, I think Frank had a good call out on Donovan Peoples-Jones. I don't think he's draftable if Watson's out for the year. If Watson plays, I think Peoples-Jones could be one of those guys that's on a lot of rosters that win leagues. He's a big play guy. He had flashes last season, had a 100-yard, 2-touchdown game, 34 catches, almost 600 yards. So the guy was averaging 20 yards a catch with Baker. And that big play threat, that's not what Cooper is. He's a great receiver. He's not the big play guy. I think that he could really have an outstanding year if they have Watson. So even if they get him the second half of the season, that's a name to keep on your radar, keep on your watch list. Pick him up a couple weeks before Watson becomes available to play, and I think he could really shock some people this season.
Yeah, for sure. Keep an ear out. We're going to be covering fantasy football pretty much from here on out, honestly. It's one of our favorite things to do. I think we got some pretty good knowledge in this little circle we've got right here. But, there's not much more to say about the Browns. I do think they have one of the best offensive lines in college football, which really, really helps that running game. Or I said college football. What an idiot.
They probably do. I would agree with you there.
Yeah, I mean, I'd put them up there. I mean, I think they'd give Bama a run for their money.
I don't know, man. They have one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. How about that?
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna move on to the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is another one in the quarterback room where I'm kind of iffy. Obviously, Mitch Trubisky has had his issues with his former teams, but at the rate he's going right now, he's the starter from what I've read. They did draft Kenny Pickett, but as you can see, according to ESPN, and although this depth chart is not official, Kenny Pickett's the third string quarterback right now. He does have that flash potential, obviously, and then Mason Rudolph. We all know what Mason Rudolph is. Not very good. That's what he is. They do have one of the best running back picks in fantasy football right now in Naji Harris. And they do have a lot of good wide receivers that are probably going to put up a lot of points. And I would say their three starters here in Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, and George Pickens are probably going to be drafted in every single league that you're in or that that they're in, period. Of the best, I would say Claypool is the biggest big play threat that they have. But Deontay Johnson is no slouch. He catches a lot of footballs. About to say baseballs. About to screw it up again. And then rookie George Pickens is turning some heads right now in training camp. And then also you have tight end Pat Freiermuth, who came on at the end of the year last year as a pretty big play threat for Ben Roethlisberger. Now, is that going to be the same with Mitch Trubisky? I don't know. Also, is Mitch Trubisky going to be the starter day one? And if he is, how long will he be there? Because I don't see the Pittsburgh Steelers losing and not making changes at quarterback. They're not an organization that likes to lose. They don't lose very often, and they're always going to have good years and good seasons. But they've also had Ben Roethlisberger for the past decade and a half. So, what are your guys' opinions on drafting Steelers players?
I'm all in.
Yeah, I'm high on some, low on others. So let's go quarterback first. I'm not drafting any of them. Nobody in that quarterback room is rosterable, in my opinion, in a standard league. I think the best bet for Pittsburgh is to start Trubisky. I think he's the best of the three. I believe he's underrated, and I think a year under Brian Daboll and behind Josh Allen has probably improved him more than any of his playing time he's had so far. But I wouldn't draft any of them. Then at running back, I am extremely high on Naji Harris. I actually have him as my running back too. I think he's the second best running back in fantasy football. And going back to the same thing I said earlier, it's all about opportunity. This guy had more opportunities than any running back in football last year. 401 carries and targets combined. Second in that category was Jonathan Taylor at 383, the best running back in football. Joe Mixon was third at 340. So, that's a huge discrepancy. He had over 60 more chances to touch the ball throughout the season than the third best running back. So, it's too much usage coming off a healthy year to not take him over a Derrick Henry or Christian McCaffrey, where they're both older backs who missed significant time last year.
Yeah, Naji is going to be a dude. Like you said, Coop's Coop's mantra of having over 200 carries, 200 touches a game, or 200 touches a year is a good starting point for drafting running backs in fantasy football because they get more opportunities, whether it be out of the backfield on routes or getting handed the ball. Naji is a workhorse. You very rarely see anybody else in the backfield during a Pittsburgh Steelers game. And that's kind of unheard of in today's NFL as well. Very rarely do you see anybody else beside Naji back there. And he was quoted earlier in the week saying that he'll literally touch the ball every single play if that's what it takes. He doesn't do, carry restrictions. No, it doesn't take days off, for lack of a better term. But I think of the players on this roster, especially, I think he's going to be the highest draft pick of anybody, obviously. But he may very well be a top 5 pick in your draft. Definitely, if you're in the top 5, I would have him circled on my draft list, ready to go moving forward. So let's talk about these receivers: Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, George Pickens. Which of these guys do you think is going to have the biggest year? And which one would you go after first if you had the opportunity?
Well, Chase Claypool just got injury, so I think I would wait to pick him before anything else comes out on that. So, and I think Deontay Johnson's much better threat, playmaker. Granted, he drops about every other throw, but the dude is a stud when he does catch the ball. So I think Deontay Johnson's first off the board for any of the Steelers guys.
Yeah, he's definitely the top pick. But, I look at all of them in terms of where they're going. Where can I get this guy? And in terms of best value, I'm leaning Pickens. I love rookie wide receivers just because you really don't know what you're going to get. So if you spend a 13th round pick on a rookie wide receiver, it's not a big deal. You can drop them and you haven't lost a starter. It's not somebody you invested a lot in. And if they hit, they're changing the league for you. I think the numbers of Claypool and Johnson both drop. I'm not saying that Big Ben had a great year, but I think there's too many mouths in Pittsburgh to have 5 fantasy relevant players. And that's not including a quarterback. I don't think they can sustain 3 wide receivers that are relevant in fantasy, a tight end, and a top 5 running back. There's not enough offense to go around in a team that we think is going to be sub 500, probably the worst in the division. So Johnson's great, target monster, second in the league last year, had 169 balls thrown his way. So that's 10 targets a game. I just don't think he can repeat that volume. Same thing with Claypool. He's been consistent, right at 60 catches and 800 yards both years in the league. But Big Ben's gone. George Pickens has came in, and he's been the standout in camp, right? The quarterbacks are raving about him. He's making highlight catches. So I think he's going to take some of that volume. And it might not be enough to move him past them in terms of like 1, 2, 3 where they rank, but it's going to be enough to devalue where they're being drafted.
Yeah, I like Pickens. When you come from a place like Georgia, and Georgia's getting to be like Alabama with players littered all over the league, he flew under the radar here at Georgia the last couple of years. I think he got hurt, came back. He wasn't really the number 1 guy. Slipped in the draft a little bit, but if you read anything about what's going on in training camp right now, Mr. Trubisky is high on George Pickens, and with the relatively unknown of Pickens moving forward, you're probably looking at people more leaning towards safety help with Johnson and even Freiermuth up the middle, and we'll get to him in a minute. I think Freiermuth honestly is a sleeper moving forward. But Pickens is probably, no pun intended, my pick to draft out of these 3 receivers because he might have the best opportunity to catch the most balls. And if the quarterback-receiver relationship and trust is there with Mitchell Trubisky, with the other 2 covered up most of the time, he's going to get everything underneath, which is, in a PPR league, is massive. And, obviously he's a good athlete, so he's going to make something happen. So other than Freiermuth, I don't see anybody else on this list that even warrants a mention, being a Kentucky guy, we can say Benny Snell, but he's not a fantasy football player that's going to get drafted. Unless something happens to Naji Harris, God forbid, Benny Snell may move forward and be the number one running back. But Freiermuth is a little bit of a name that I like to look at and be like, hey, is he another guy that can take a step forward, kind of like a Dalton Schultz type of player? Like a guy that is a tight end or in red zone threat consistently. When they're inside the 20, he's a guy they go to. I do think he can be that option. I honestly do. Is he draftable? Probably not. Is he somebody that you probably put on your watch list? I think so. I think of the tight ends that you're looking at the bottom of the screen now, he could fit anywhere from that 6 to 7 range with the players that are on there right now, in my opinion. Talent-wise, he's in there. Production-wise, not yet for me.
Yeah, I think there's, like you said, there's a pool of tight ends. Like after 8th for me, you look at Dallas Goedert. I think after him it drops off, and then any one of those guys you can throw a dart at. You got Gesicki, Knox, Cole Kmet in Chicago, Freiermuth. I think all those guys are kind of whoever you like the best is probably going to give you similar numbers to the rest of the people in that tier. So I think, Freiermuth's going to be drafted in a lot of leagues. He's 11th on ESPN right now. So if you want to take a shot on him, I think it's a fine choice.
I don't think you take him unless these other guys are gone, obviously. He's not going to be the 4th, 5th tight end off the list.
Yeah.
Don't do that. If you're going to draft him, make sure all these other guys are gone first that are going to get catches and get targets.
Yeah.
Don't go and draft. Go ahead, Coop.
That's a great thing to call out because just because we say, like, George Pickens is the guy I'm targeting out of these receivers, I would never take George Pickens over Deontay Johnson or Chase Claypool. That's not what we're saying. We're just saying based on the value of where these guys are being drafted. Look at their ADP on the websites, their average draft position, see where they're going. And at that point, that player would be the best value in our opinion. So it's a good thing to call out. Like, we're high on Freiermuth. He's not a top 5 tight end.
He's probably going undrafted in almost 95% of the leagues.
Yeah, that's for sure. But, we're all about finding that sleeper pick. That guy that you have 2 picks left and one of them's got to be a kicker and you don't know who to draft. If Freiermuth's available, I'd reach for him. Same thing with Pickens. I'd say Pickens probably won't be there, honestly. People do tend to look at rookie wide receivers very close when it comes to fantasy football. Same thing with rookie running backs. Almost nobody's looking at tight ends down below the top 5, top 6. They hear the name Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, but they haven't really been relevant in terms of statistics in a while. But tight ends are really, really hit and miss in the NFL unless you're Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews because, they're going to get 10 looks a game at least. But with Freiermuth, he's not a bad guy to go after if, you got 3 picks left, and why not? To hell with it. We're going to go on to one of the more, I would say, head-scratching teams when it comes to drafting players. Obviously, one that you don't have to scratch your head about is Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is a complete stud at the game of football. He puts up video game numbers. He is quick on his feet. He can throw the ball around. And he's got one of the best personalities you can have on the football field. I love watching him play. I'm a Kentucky fan. The dude played for Louisville. Didn't like him when he played for Louisville, but once I watch him, and he plays for a division rival of the team that I actually love, but he's fun to watch. He is a football player through and through. He is going to be a top 5 quarterback off the board, in my opinion. The running back room is a little up in the air for me. J.K. Dobbins is obviously the starter. Him and Gus Edwards both went down last year. The running back room in Baltimore last year was ravaged with injuries. We don't really know a lot moving forward as to who to draft, honestly. But J.K. Dobbins was the dude last year in training camp. I don't see that being any different moving forward. But the wide receivers, in my opinion, these are some guys that you may not even know who they are. They don't put up numbers. I don't know. It's weird for me. And obviously the most, or this, I'd say the second most polarizing figure on this list would have to be Mark Andrews. But obviously Mark Andrews, Lamar Jackson, absolute no doubters. Probably, I'd say both of them would probably be off your board within the first 3 rounds in most drafts. Everybody else, I don't know. What are your thoughts? I really don't. I wish I could say I did, but I don't.
Hitting on the first two, Andrews is number 1 tight end in fantasy. I don't think there's any question there. I think he's over Kelsey. I think Kelsey is going to get a lot of attention, especially in a division where every defense got better. I think that you can get wide receiver 1 production out of Mark Andrews, and he should be the first tight end taken in every fantasy draft. I think Lamar Jackson is quarterback 2. I think it goes Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. Before he got hurt last year, he put up back-to-back 1,000-yard rushing seasons. I mean, that's insane production out of your quarterback. He's coming back with a chip on his shoulder after all this contract talk and everybody, saying it doesn't have an agent. He shouldn't step on the field again. He just went about his business. So, 1,000 yards on the ground, 3,500 yards passing, 25 touchdowns. That's going to be the first or second quarterback in fantasy football. So I think he's number 2 for me easily.
What's kind of, I would say, puzzling to me is how do you approach drafting these wide receivers? Rashad Bateman, probably wide receiver 1. Duvernay had his chances. Isn't Duvernay a punt returner as well?
Yeah.
So you do have that available if you target somebody like Devin Duvernay. James Proche, I don't even know how you pronounce his name. Don't draft him unless you're hard on injuries or bye weeks, and the dude went off for 3 touchdowns last week. Draft him the week after. That's probably about the only time you'll draft that guy. There's not really much else to say about Baltimore. I do think they're going to be a pretty decent team. Their defense is going to keep them in a lot of games. I would want to go rewind myself back to talk about the Browns as well. The Browns are going to have a hell of a defense. They're going to keep them in some games. I think having the Browns defense the way it is, the Browns offensive line the way it is, all the more reasons to draft those types of players that are in their backfield. Like I said, you're probably going to get a lot of production out of both Chubb and both Chubb and Kareem Hunt there in the backfield at Cleveland. I don't want to backpedal there, but talking about defenses, Cleveland's probably got one of the best defenses in the league. And they're going to keep them in a lot of games. Clock management, run the ball.
I think I'm really high on Baltimore. I know I just talked about those 2, and we'll get into the other ones here. J.K. Dobbins, I love it. I love the risk that he puts out there. People are going to be hesitant. He's coming off the injury. But I think he's one of those guys. There's a couple players here right around running back 20, those back-end RB2s that I'm really excited about because they don't cost you too much. They may be the 3rd running back you're taking in drafts. And I think J.K. Dobbins has top 10 upside. Like, I have him right there kind of in a category by themselves with Breece Hall. Like, the situation that they're in, the volume they could get, like, he could have 250 carries and 70 targets. Like, he can catch the ball out of the backfield. They don't have to bring anybody else in. And this team rushes the ball more than any team in the NFL over the last 3 seasons. Last year, they had the 2nd most games missed for injury of anybody. Offensive line, cornerback, running backs. Jackson went down for some games. They were so beat up that I don't even think you can look at last season. And on that same note, because of those injuries, I think Tyler Beatty is also an interesting pick here as he's not even on the depth chart, but I think that he could get some carries. Mike Davis couldn't get the job done in Atlanta. He lost his job to a wide receiver in Cordero Patterson. Justice Hill wasn't impressive with the full workload last season. So I think that Beatty, as a rookie coming in behind 2 running backs coming off season-ending injuries, could be a nice stash or watch list player.
Yeah, for sure. Moving on to the last team that is in the division is my beloved Cincinnati Bengals. Runner-up, Super Bowl. I would say Super Bowl second place champions. Is that fair to say?
Nope, that's soft.
Shut up. Tell me when the commies get there, Dave. Cincinnati Bengals depth chart, loaded, in my opinion, with fantasy football talent. Just take the top 5 guys you see on that list: Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd. All of those guys are going to be drafted in your leagues. All of those guys are probably going to be drafted fairly high. Jamar Chase, probably the first guy off the board in this list, for good reason. I would say probably Joe Mixon, maybe close second. Joe Burrow is going to be a guy that gives you consistent value. And when you are in a 2-quarterback league like we are, if you can't get 2 top-tier quarterbacks, I would probably put Joe Burrow in that top 10 category. According to ESPN, he is in the top 10. Playing 2-quarterback leagues is probably one of the funnest things we've ever done because it does make you think about your draft and how you're going to draft quarterbacks, especially if you play 2 quarterbacks and keepers, because most of the time our keepers are our quarterbacks. If you are in a league that doesn't do that, you redraft every year, and you don't have a stat stuffer, Joe Burrow is a guy to target, man. He's going to have a big year this year. I have a feeling. Is it going to be Super Bowl run worthy? I don't know. That's too hard to tell. The player that I think is going to have a drop in production is probably going to be Jamar Chase. He's not going to take anybody by surprise anymore. Obviously, he's very talented. He's going to be a guy that he will get targets. Will he get yards and catches? That's to be determined. I think teams are going to start playing defense against the Bengals a little bit better. I feel like they took him by surprise, or he took the world by surprise last year with his ability to get open. I don't think that's going to be happening this year. The player on the Bengals that I think should be drafted and kept on a roster at all times is probably T. Higgins. I think T. Higgins has the most to gain out of anybody on that list of receivers in the Bengals rooms. He's going to be the guy as the second option at all times. He puts up big numbers, even being covered. He's not going to get your number 1 cornerback coverage. Their defense is not planning around T. Higgins, but he is a number 1 receiver without Jamar Chase on the field. He's going to be a number 1 receiver on a lot of other teams. So Tyler Boyd, he's going to be another guy that I don't want to throw him off to the side, but he's going to be a good flex player for deep leagues. He's going to get his touches. He's sure-handed. When Joe Burrow is in scramble, he needs to throw somebody. He needs to find somebody open. They need a first down for sure. They're going to Tyler Boyd. He's going to catch the ball. He caught every pass thrown to him except for the one that mattered last year in the Super Bowl. So, let's get y'all's opinions on the Bengals. How do you guys stack up when you're drafting teams in your leagues? And your team makeup has a lot to do with where you're headed and what you target. But with the Bengals here, who do you target the most? And which player do you think gives you the most value in where you're going to get them at?
Yeah, when I look at this list, I'm looking at Joe Mixon being the one that's probably going to be the most value. ESPN has him at the number 7 running back, and I think every year that he's stayed healthy, he has produced as a top 10 running back. But like, Frank, you're going on and on about the 3 wide receivers, and that's kind of what scares me. I'm currently in a situation right now where I have to decide between Jamar Chase and Cooper Kupp as my keeper in a league, and I'm kind of leaning Cooper Kupp because I just don't know if Jamar Chase is going to continue hitting all those home run balls that he did game after game. What did he hit the Chiefs for 3? Was that week 16? And that was his game. He'd go 0 catches, and then boom, he'd have 2 for 95 yards. So the ESPN has Chase at number 3 wide receiver. He's a sophomore. Sophomore slumps are real. Mm-hmm. It's hard for me to say that Jamar Chase is number 3 fantasy guy off the board. He might be the number 3 talent in the league, but like you all said, they're going to start playing defense way differently against the Bengals. The Bengals have arrived. People know about them. They're not just going to walk into Cincinnati and think they got the W like they were last year. But I would agree. I mean, Burrow's top 10. You know, if you aren't worried about a quarterback, if you don't need Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, you're going to wait to get your guy that's going to give you consistent 20, 25 points. Joe Burrow is going to be your dude that you're going to target late in the draft. But yeah, Bengals are solid. It's going to be a real interesting year to see what they do.
Yeah, I'm on board. I think Mixon's running back 5. You've got, in my opinion, Taylor, Harris, McCaffrey, Henry, and then Mixon's kind of the best of the rest. Had that stat earlier. He was 3rd in the league in opportunities last season. 340 times they got him the ball, even with those other 3 receivers and Joe Burrow breaking out. So he's kind of the backbone of that team. And I love the receivers. I think they're great. It's the best 1-2 punch in the league, probably the best 1-2 punch in fantasy with Chris Godwin coming back from injury. But I think they're too high. They have them at 3 and 11. And I just don't see Joe Burrow and that offense producing 3 or 2 of the top 11 wide receivers in fantasy football. I think they both need to be knocked down a few notches. And the volume doesn't match up. Like Jamar Chase, he's a big play guy. He doesn't get those targets that the other receivers up there, even the Keenan Allens, the guys that are behind him, you know, they're getting 130, 40 targets a year. And Burrow's not getting that. He's not hitting 100 catches. He's projected outside the top 10 in total targets. And there's only 7 reception difference between him and T. Higgins. That gap is too big. I think they're both too high. And the one I'm looking at is Tyler Boyd because he's the best wide receiver handcuff in football. I don't think there's a better wide receiver handcuff out there because he's proven he can be a top 30 wide receiver. He can be a solid number 2 guy. He's done it for years. So Jamar Chase and Higgins both kind of had some ailments last year, nothing serious, but they both, I think, missed a game or 2. And if they go down, Tyler Boyd is an instant top 30 wide receiver and a guy that you can play every week.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you guys just said. And Dave, I totally agree with you. When you pick between Cooper Kupp and Jamar Chase, that's a no-brainer for me. It's Cooper Kupp all the way. It doesn't matter who you're playing. Cooper Kupp's good for 10 and 100, in my opinion, and probably a touchdown. Coop, what you said about him being 3 and T. Higgins being 11, I do agree with that a lot too. And in terms of fantasy value, I don't see Jamar Chase putting up consistent every week numbers. He will have weeks where he has 3 touchdowns and 150 yards and 10 catches. He will have weeks like that. But he's not going to have consistent 100-yard games. He's probably going to have weeks where he has 2, 3 catches for 50 yards and no touchdowns. You look at a guy like Deebo Samuel, who's behind him. The dude's going to consistently get the ball in his hands, whether it be out of the backfield. He's going to get his touches and opportunities. I also honestly think Devontae Adams in a new spot down there, he's going to be the go-to guy there as well. And Stephon Diggs. There's a lot of guys behind him that I can see have better fantasy upkeep consistently. Now, boomer bust situation, you looking for somebody to give you can't take him out of your lineup. You can't. But there are other options, although he is ranked high. There are options out there that I think are going to give you better consistency. And that's what fantasy football is all about. Is getting consistency every single week. Getting consistent numbers of points all week long. Not necessarily drafting the best players, but drafting the most consistent ones often helps you win. So,
and we've got a little time here. I think we went. I mean, that's it for the Bengals.
Yeah.
So I got one thing on them though.
Yep.
Right, go ahead.
This is interesting for me. They had the 3rd easiest schedule in the NFL last year. They will now have the 7th hardest, and now they're going from playing only the Jets in the AFC East to now they will be playing all 4 teams, Bills, Dolphins, Patriots, and Jets. And they will also be playing the entire NFC South division, which, forget Carolina and Atlanta, but you're still playing Tom Brady, you're still playing the Saints. And then their other filler teams are the Titans, the Chiefs, and the Cowboys. So that schedule sounds real brutal. And it's going to be real interesting to see, do the Bengals even go 500 this year?
Yeah, I think they do. I don't know if they're going to win their division. I really don't. It's going to be really hard to be. It's like I said about consistency. It's going to be hard to be consistent, especially with that schedule that you mentioned. Is Joe Burrow the dude? We'll know after this year. If he can get 12 wins, 11 wins off this schedule, he's a future Hall of Fame quarterback, in my opinion. But if he doesn't, is it the end of the world? Probably not. Here's my thing. I'm a Bengals fan, and I take bias out the window. This is a team that made it to the Super Bowl when nobody expected them to do so, and they got better in the offseason. Is it that much better? I don't know. But supposedly on paper, they got better. Their defense is going to have to continue to get better every week and stay healthy. And for God's sakes, somebody give Jesse Bates a contract.
Really, the only improvement they needed to make was a half second on the offensive line.
Yeah.
And maybe they did that.
I think they did that. I mean, they put an effort in. And that's what a lot of people really just want to see. You know, I mean, that's all I want to see. I just wanted to see some effort. And I think they did that. I think they did that for sure. All right, Coop, moving forward, you got something?
Yeah, we did. We skipped Baltimore wide receivers, and that was on me because I had them and I stopped talking. But I really like these guys. I like both of them. I was high on Rashad Bateman last year. I drafted him. He got hurt, like we already said, along with the entire Baltimore Ravens locker room. I saw a stat today that they had over 350 games missed, by the combined injuries of the players they had last season. I have Bateman inside my top 30, like in my draft rankings. I think he is a better built, the way he profiles, his play style, his size, to be a lead wide receiver on a team than Hollywood Brown is. He was kind of a deep ball or nothing, boomer bust, that Tyler Lockett style. And I think Bateman could be huge. Like we were just talking about Lamar stats. If he puts up, like we said, 3,500 yards and 25 touchdowns, like Mark Andrews is only catching about a third of that. Somebody else has got to get the ball. And I think Bateman is by far and away the guy to do it. I do like keeping an eye on Duvernay. I don't think he's a draft guy. You're in a deep league, maybe even, daily fantasy, something to look at. But he's really unique to me. He's built in that Deebo Samuel, Jamar Chase style. Like he is a thick physical receiver, 6 foot, over 200 pounds. And I think we're going to see him in the run game a little bit. It wouldn't shock me at all if he ends the season 25 carries, 100 rushing yards, and a touchdown or two. And that makes him really interesting to me as a late round fill-in because he's still going to get the routes, maybe not the targets or the receiving volume of some other wide receiver twos, but that rushing yardage, I mean, that makes a big difference if a wide receiver can pick up that much value on the ground. And I think that the way they play and the style of player he is, they're going to use him in that way.
Yeah, so in your opinions, which players out of this division do you think are going to have the best overall fantasy value? Not necessarily the ones you're going to draft first, but it's a question that I'm putting you guys on the spot for. But let's look through these lists one more time. So we have the Browns depth chart. Probably the best ones that I mean, obviously you have the 2 running backs and Amari Cooper, end of list, in terms of people that I would actually circle on my draft sheet before a draft even started. And the Bengals depth chart, obviously Joe Burrow, if you don't already have quarterbacks, if you're not in a keeper league. Joe Mixon, probably going to be a top 5 running back taken off the board. Jamar Chase, top 5 wide receiver. T. Higgins, top 10 receiver, maybe. Tyler Boyd, he's going to be drafted in most leagues. Lamar Jackson, obviously going to be a big draft pick. Mark Andrews, probably maybe a top 10 draft pick overall. With that being said, and moving on to the Steelers, and I think you have Naji Harris, end of list. Which of these guys in these teams do you think are going to have the best overall fantasy value for your team moving forward? And which ones do you think are going to be probably the biggest bust out of the ones? Which ones do you think are not going to work out the way that they probably should? We'll start with the first question. Sorry, go ahead.
So which player is going to outperform their draft position, basically?
In my opinion, yes.
I think the answer is in Baltimore. And I want to say J.K. Dobbins, but I'm really skeptical coming off that injury. the thing that makes me feel so much better about him is that Gus Edwards had a very similar injury after him, is taking longer to recover. Like Baltimore saying he's further away. He's not looking even like he'll be practicing week 1. So I think that if Dobbins gets the okay and gets off to a good start with Edwards sidelined, that he's going to run away with that job. And like I said, he's ranked 21 on ESPN right now. He's a risk. I wouldn't reach and get him in the top 15 because of that, but I think he can put up top 10 numbers. Like if he comes in ahead of DeAndre Swift and Javonte Williams, I wouldn't be surprised at all. And those guys are sitting at 10 and 11 right now.
Yeah, that's some pretty big words there, Coop. Dave, you got an idea of which of these guys that you think are going to outperform their draft stock?
Yeah, I do. We didn't really even talk about him, but we talked a lot about his cast around him, and that's going to be Mitchell Trubisky in my mind. You know, we talked a lot about Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, Pat Freiermuth, George Pickens, Naji Harris. Someone's got to get them the ball. And, you know, we're sitting here looking at Mitch Trubisky, number 33 quarterback on ESPN's list. I think he's an absolute waiver wire steal in my mind. I don't think you're going to start him the first couple of weeks. I think that situation's pretty fluid. You got to see what's actually going to happen. You know, maybe Mike Tomlin plays Kenny Pickett. We don't know. But, you know, in my mind, Mitch Trubisky handled the whole Matt Nagy Chicago Bears situation beautifully. Looking back on it, he took a toxic environment to the NFC Championship game. They were a double doink away from going to the Super Bowl. He is a good quarterback. I mean, he was drafted ahead of Mahomes and Watson. We all know it. Now he's in the same division as Watson. He's got that chip on his shoulder. He did a year under Josh Allen in Buffalo. I am very excited to see what Mitchell Trubisky shows us this year. I think he's got the chance. He's going to a great coach in Mike Tomlin with a very stable environment. It's not Chicago anymore. Yeah. And he's got guys around him. I think there is no better value in the AFC North right now on paper than Mitchell Trubisky. That'll all change, you know, whatever September 1st game. But right now, that's the guy who I'm circling of. As soon as the draft is over, I'm probably going to go pick him up.
Yeah. I think a great point you made is that culture that he's in, that environment. You guys know I'm high on Pittsburgh. But one thing a lot of these teams do, like San Francisco had Jimmy G and they drafted Trey Lance. It was awkward, right? Cleveland had Baker Mayfield. They traded for Deshaun Watson. It got awkward. Now Carolina is awkward with Sam Darnold and
Baker.
Yeah, that guy. I don't even like him. I can't remember his name. That's how much I don't like Baker. But
we've crapped on Baker for 20 episodes of this podcast.
Yeah. What I love what they did is they told him he knows it's a year to prove himself. He's not the long-term answer. They drafted Kenny Pickett. Everybody knows that's what the future is in Pittsburgh. But they gave him a shot, and they know, you know, both parties know exactly what it is and what his job in Pittsburgh is. He's there to try to make himself look better and show Kenny Pickett how to play NFL football. So, I think it's great. And those guys usually, you know, they step up and have good years. So I think it's a good call out.
I would agree with that, Dave. I like your pick better than Coop's, honestly. Not gonna lie. My pick,
easy to pick the quarterback. That's huge value off the bat.
But sometimes it's not. It really isn't. Like, you're not going to go get some crappy quarterback. I mean, you have 12 fantasy teams in the league usually. Sometimes 8. You're not. I mean, he's not going to get drafted. Probably not going to get picked up from. He might be in 30% of leagues, maybe. But like you said, if he comes out has a pretty good first couple of weeks, you go and get him in the waiver wire, especially in really deep leagues like we have. How many players do we draft, Coop? It's probably over
20. We have a 20-man roster.
And 12 players or 10? 10 teams or 12?
We have 8 teams, but we have a 20-man roster.
Oh, yeah. So,
160 players.
That's a crap ton of NFL players, especially when you look at some of our rosters, and at the bottom of them, you got guys that would literally barely have names on the back of their jerseys.
Yeah,
that's how it happens most of the time.
Just for reference to everyone, Frank hasn't won the league, and it may have something to do with him not knowing how many teams are in it.
It changes. Shut up. It changes.
I think his wife has actually won the league.
No.
No.
My wife did. My wife did win it one year. And then we kicked her out. She's not been in it.
You kicked her out.
She's not been in it since. I didn't kick her out. And people are like, "Oh, Frank, you probably run her team." No, I wasn't. She did everything. I promise.
Yeah, that was obvious. They won.
Yeah, this is real obvious. You had no inclusion in that one.
I don't even know why I'm friends with you guys. I really don't.
Anyway, Frank, who's your pick to outperform their draft position?
My pick is going to come from this Cleveland Browns, and it's going to be Donovan Peoples-Jones. Donovan Peoples-Jones is going to be a receiver, obviously, that nobody really looks at. They've got Amari Cooper. Nobody knows who the quarterback is going to be. But with that, they got to have another option, right? They can't just hand the ball off and then throw it to Amari Cooper every time. You can't do it. Njoku's not going to be the guy they give a lot of bulk to. He's going to get 2 or 3 targets a game, maybe. But with that, I think Peoples-Jones is going to be a guy that probably will go undrafted in a lot of leagues. I don't know where he's ranked. I don't really care. But he's got to be a number 2 option. If you're going to win football games, you can't have one option at receiver, right? You got to have people that can jump in, have the bulk of the other targets when Amari Cooper is going to get covered up by 4 different DBs every game. That's just my opinion. The thing that's going to hold him back is the instability. We talk about bad cultures. I think the Browns have a bad culture. I don't know if you can
way.
I don't think you can get much worse than the Browns, honestly.
Washington's giving a
I was getting ready to say the Washington Commander. I was getting ready to say Washington, but in terms of like running a team, I don't know if you can get much worse than the Browns right now. On-field product. Washington's going to win some football games. Don't get me wrong. Their problems are off the field. On the field is where the Browns have struggled for decades. We're running on 3 decades now of not being good. Now, when they drafted Baker Mayfield, I had high hopes for him. I was like, hey, I think I talked to a coworker one time in the teacher's lounge. Be like, hey, I think Browns are going to win 8 games this year. And he called me an idiot. And they went out and won 8 games. And then they're putting themselves in playoff contention with Baker Mayfield there. And now nothing's really happening. But with that being said, Peoples-Jones is definitely my sleeper pick of somebody that might get drafted, but is definitely going to outperform wherever draft stock they come out of. He's probably going to be probably 6 to 7 target a game kind of guy, I would say. If they decide, they might be one of those teams that just run it down your throat and see what happens. Depending on if Jacoby Brissett's a quarterback, he's going to have to. But that's our picks for the sleepers in this division. I don't even remember my other question. Do you guys remember?
Bust.
Oh, biggest bust. I'll go first with that one. I think it's going to be, let me look around through here. I don't want to say it, but I think it's going to be Jamar Chase, honestly. I think Jamar Chase is overvalued. I love him. Don't get me wrong. I want him to have a hell of a year. But I don't see him being the guy that's ranked number 3 overall. I don't see him putting up those numbers. I see him having 4, 5 games, 6 games maybe, where he plays out of this world, and you blow somebody out of the water that week when you're playing them. But other weeks, you're going to get mediocre wide receiver 3 value from him. That's my opinion.
Yeah. Like Dave pointed out, they have a terrible schedule, especially for wide receivers. There's so many good corners on that schedule. You got A.J. Terrell. Even when you're playing the bad teams, you got him in Atlanta. You got Lattimore in New Orleans. I mean, all of those, Jamel Dean in Tampa, like they have elite corners on pretty much every team he named. And I think that's going to be a struggle for them. My pick's Deontay Johnson. I just think top 15 is too high for Pittsburgh's offense, especially with how many players they have that are supposed to be relevant. I think he's going to be good. I think he's going to have a good season. He'll still be the top one out of those players, but ranked at 14th in wide receivers right now, I have him just outside the top 20, in my own rankings. I don't think he can repeat 169 targets, and it took him that much volume to still fall outside the top 10 last year.
Dave, you up, big dog?
Oh, God. I don't even know who. I got to go through my list here.
That's what I did. You need help? Here's the Browns depth chart. Yeah. I don't think there's any busts in the Browns depth chart. I just don't think there's any, lo and behold, knock it out of the ballpark kind of guys.
Yeah, I think with the Browns, though, it's like if they even do remotely well,
it's a win.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody's going to expect much out of Amari Cooper when you don't even know who's throwing him the ball. So, I don't know. I think I'll go boom or bust here. I'll join everybody. I'll say Lamar Jackson will be a bust this year.
Ooh.
I don't really know how to rationalize it. I'm just going to go with he's going to get hurt. And
that's where I was going to go with that one. I was like, the only way that's going to come to fruition is if he gets hurt somehow.
Yeah, not a bad reason. It happened.
Very capable. Very capable.
And I mean, he is this generation's Michael Vick. I mean, he is absolutely electric on that field. He is, if there's one guy that you're going to say, hey, go get me a first down, he's in that short list of guys that you're going to go talk to get that first down. So I don't know. I'm going big. Lamar Jackson, he'll be a bust this year.
I don't think you get much bigger than that one, Dave. Mm-hmm. The only thing you could have said differently is if we were doing something and you said, like Tom Brady or something. But
hey, if you guys are watching live or recorded version later on, send us some of these questions throughout the week. We've got all the social medias. Ask us, not really starter sit, but who would you rather have, or boom or bust players. We can give you guys that stuff. We'd love to interact more, get more feedback from everybody. So let us know, and hopefully we'll all be able to answer you pretty quickly.
Yeah, for sure. So with that, we're going to close down today's show. Just a quick reminder: keep everybody in Eastern Kentucky in your thoughts and prayers. They need it really bad. We've got things coming from our hometown back and forth every day. But, one thing here and there is not going to be enough. You need to put in as much as you can. Donate as much as you can. Look on Facebook. There's hundreds of things needed, different places that you can drop supplies off to. Just keep those people in your thoughts and prayers. It's going to take a while to build back, especially, friends that I have, people that I know have lost pretty much everything, every valuable anything that they possibly could imagine. They don't have anything left. And it's very hard to put that into thoughts or even to put it into words. And I'm not very good at it, obviously. So I'm going to leave it at that. And it's really a crappy situation that, God works in mysterious ways. So, people in Eastern Kentucky are very strong. They're strong-willed. You're not going to keep them down for very long. So, with that being said, we're going to close out our show. Thanks for all you that tuned in live. If you're coming back and watching it later, leave us a comment, like Coop said. Throw us some questions out there. We'd love to interact with you guys. We had a couple of guys on the chat today. Coach Booth mentioned at Hazard. Great job, guys. Coach Whitaker at Buckhorn. I appreciate it. We're all of our thoughts and prayers with you guys. So anything we can do to help, just let us know. We're going to close out today's show with saying that we love everybody. We love you for tuning in. Thank you. We're trying to grow this podcast. This is episode 20. Just get it out there. We love doing it. Have a great time. I feel like we do a pretty good job. I don't know about you guys. I don't want to toot my own horn, but we're learning every day. Like, this is a new program we're using. I think I like it pretty well. Get to do some pretty cool stuff on it. But we're going to close out today's show and say we love you guys. Thanks you for tuning in. Tune in next week. We're going to do this, hopefully, every Sunday at 9 o'clock. So keep a lookout for us. Peace.